All right. It's about time to get going. Good to see everyone tonight. Let's have a word of prayer, please. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day that you have blessed us with. Thank you for another opportunity that you have given us in the middle of this week that we can come together and see one another and visit with one another and check up on one another, gather together and study your word and come to you in prayer and sing songs. And we're so thankful for the opportunities that we have. We're so thankful for the kingdom, for your son's church that has been built. We're thankful to be a part of it. And we're thankful for the gospel. We're thankful for the good news and the comfort that it gives us in this world. Father, we're so thankful for all that is good and perfect that comes from your hand. Help us to share those blessings with others, to share the good news with others. We pray that it's heavy on our hearts and on our minds. We know that in the world, with all the hustle and bustle, a lot of folks don't think about spiritual matters, but help us to try to persuade them to do and to think differently, turning to you for your glory. Father, please be with those of our number that aren't doing well. Just ask your blessings on them, on those who are caring for them, those who are mentioned Sunday. We're thankful that Bruce and Brenda are back with us safely. Be with those who are continuing to travel or preparing to travel. Thinking of Delilah and others. Just keep them safe. Be with us tonight. Be with us throughout this week. Keep us safe and in your care, physically, spiritually. Please forgive us of our sins. We're so thankful for your grace and your mercy and your love that you have. We're so thankful for Jesus, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. All right, we are ready for lesson number 2 in 2 Samuel. And I had the wrong place marked where we were to leave off, but we did do the questions 2 weeks ago before the singing, because I remember us talking about question number 3, are there times when we should not mourn the fallen? We talked about different circumstances with that, and we had pretty much already looked at the last 2 questions as well. So let's come on to chapter 3. So just to refresh ourselves, there is civil war. Chapter 3, verse 1, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew stronger and stronger, but the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. We left off with the account of as basically that war begins with all of those individuals being killed. How many was it there at the beginning? How many was it who faced off one another?
360 versus 20.
Well, I was looking more earlier when it's 12 from Benjamin and 12 from servants of David, and they all die, and then it kicks off the larger battle, and it is frankly a bloodbath. But in the midst of all of that, one of David's soldiers that is killed is Joab's brother Asahel, and he's killed by Abner. And then Abner calls to Joab, and Joab blows the trumpet, verse 28, and the fighting ceases. But there is still war. Chapter 3. Verse 2, as we think about David growing stronger and stronger, sons were born to David in Hebron. Verse 2, his firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam the Jezreelitess. His second, Chileah, by Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, by David's wife, Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. What happened to all of Saul's sons, for the most part? It's like they're killed. Ishbosheth is left. I don't know if there's others. You remember later on, David is going to make the point of saying, is there still any family left? And there was, but there wasn't much, and there was one. Anybody remember who it was? It's Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son. So, I mean, Saul's family, the family tree has not been completely uprooted, but it's been cut down pretty severely, And on the flip side, David's family tree is doing what? And it's growing and growing and growing. In the handout, I referenced there's a verse in Psalm 127, verse 5, where it talks about it, just talking about family, and it's describing a lot of children as arrows in a quiver. That with a large family, what do you have? You have a quiver full of arrows. Well, what's happened to Saul? He's down to one arrow. He's down to one or two arrows. David's quiver is growing more and more. All of these individuals that are mentioned here, there are going to be significant things that happen with at least some of them. For example, something significant is going to happen with Amnon, if you know what that's referring to. Something significant is going to happen with Absalom. Something significant is going to happen with Adonijah. And do what? I thought someone said something. Pardon me.
Shaking my head.
You might notice there at the tail end of chapter verse 3, that one, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. So that kind of tells you what some of these wives were. That sort of like with Solomon, what are we doing here?
Creating treaties.
Intermarrying treaties, and there's some goodwill politics, however you want to look at it. It looks like that may be the case. I wanted to get your thoughts because one of the questions that always comes up, and I'm just glad I'm far enough away that she can't hit me with it. People always ask about polygamy. And David, a man after God's own heart, and what does he have? He's got a lot of wives and concubines. Now, he doesn't have as many as his son's going to have, but he's still got a whole lot more than one. And so when someone asks that question, how would you answer it? Go ahead, Mark.
Well, he did wrong. They were not to multiply wives, especially the kings, and it never leads to a good end. He got 6 wives here and 6 sons, and they're all pretty much a bad end. Some of them aren't mentioned early, but they probably died young and probably weren't that great either. So I think they just lay it out there. This is what happened.
So why did the Lord allow it?
Well, he allows people to sin.
Yeah.
You know,
Why did the Lord not punish it
maybe he did. You know,
in a roundabout kind of way?
In the family, I mean,
Yeah.
You know,
You kind of reap what you sow.
a lot of sorrow.
What were you going to say, Sheila?
Just said, or maybe he will.
Maybe he will. There are some things that, when Paul's talking to the Athenians and he says, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. We know when it comes to marriage, divorce, and remarriage, when they come to Jesus and they have that question about divorce, and the Lord specifically says, Moses allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts. But then he says, but from the beginning it has not been so. And he takes it back to the garden. And I think you have to say, based on that, there were some things that the Lord allowed in allowing people to sin and make bad choices and bear the consequences of those choices, like with divorce. He allowed them to just give a certificate of divorce for any reason. And it wasn't right, but because of the hardness of their hearts, God allowed it. But it is interesting that when you get up to the New Testament, it doesn't really look like polygamy is an issue anymore. I don't think, really. Anyone have any thoughts on? I can't think of really in the New Testament where it's an issue. And what that means, and what I'm thinking is, when they came back from captivity, and they'd married a lot of wives. They'd married a lot of pagan wives. And that's the whole situation dealing with like Nehemiah and Ezra, where they got to get their marriages right. And so I wonder if that's not why 400 years later, when you get up to the New Testament, it's like, okay, polygamy is not an issue anymore. Now there's still divorce issues that the Lord's going to deal with, but anyway, might consider that. But here David is, and he's got a whole slew of wives. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I think especially, in the Middle East cultures, it was these, the kings and so forth. That's how they showed their power. A lot of them.
Yeah.
Whether you talk about Xerxes or whatever, they had these harems.
Right.
And they had, and like Solomon did, he fell prey to it.
Yeah.
David probably did too to some degree. But like you say, sometimes it's permission without approval.
Yeah.
Maybe in some things.
Do Muslims still practice polygamy? Don't they? Like in
In Jordan, you're allowed to have 4 wives, but you have to have a separate house for each wife.
okay. So amongst the sheiks and the very wealthy, effectively they still somewhat practice, because they have so many princes, so many, and it's like they're
Well,
trying to fill their quiver up, so to speak.
the guy we had, he had 2 wives,
Okay.
and he had to have separate houses for them.
Probably wise. You want to talk about how it doesn't end well. In the daily videos right now, I can't remember where we are currently because I'm always a week ahead, but with Jacob and Rachel and Leah, and then the concubines, it's like, man, that is such a hot mess. And what I was thinking of, well, like, okay, you have these 2 homes, and here Jacob was, and he had 2 wives, 2 concubines. And at a certain point, when when Rachel comes to Leah and says, give me some of your son's mandrakes. And Leah says, is it not enough that you take my husband? You're also going to take my son's mandrakes? And Rachel says, well, I guess you can have them tonight. And it's like, wow. What a hot mess. In one of the coming up videos, if you're watching them, and I'll tell you what the video is about now. Do you remember when the brothers come to Egypt in the famine, and they don't realize who Joseph is? And Joseph says, is this all of you? And they say, well, we have one brother is no more. We have a younger brother. He's back home. And blah, blah, blah. And Joseph says, go home. If you come back, you got to bring your younger brother. But I'm also going to keep one of you here, and that's Simeon. And so he binds Simeon before their eyes, and they head out. I don't know how long they're gone, but the next chapter starts with, and the famine became more severe. Time has passed. And so when they come back, and it's like, I think that's the account where, they have the money in their sacks and things like that. And they're all seeing that. Simeon's not seeing that. Simeon's effectively a hostage back in Egypt. And I don't know how long it is before eventually Jacob, Israel, sends them back with Benjamin. And then Simeon comes out. But I was making the point, or if you haven't seen yet, I will be making the point. I wonder how Simeon felt that whole time that they were gone. And lo and behold, you know what Simeon's name means? Lois, have I done the video yet? Have you seen it? What Simeon's name means, Leah has a child and says something along the lines of, God has heard that I am unloved. Simeon literally means hated. It means unloved or hated. And it's like, how could you name your child that? You name your child unloved. And the point that I made was how unloved, because when they come back and they report these things to Jacob, Jacob basically says, Joseph's dead, your brother's no more, and Don, what about Benjamin? It's like, what about Simeon? And he actually doesn't even name him. He just keeps saying, your brother. And it's like, unloved. Now, here's my point. That whole thing was such a hot mess. with the wives and the concubines. And it's like, I understand there's, the patriarchs and all of that, but that was such a hot mess. And if you don't think it was a hot mess, read the account of Judah and Tamar. And you'll see what a hot mess it was. And then you'll see the child that came from that relationship was Perez. He's in the lineage. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hot mess started with Laban when he tricked Jacob into marrying Leah. He never really wanted to marry Leah. And so I think that was all a trickle down from
And
that situation.
it keeps trickling before that. I mean, it's just, is what it is. Michael, did you have your hand up? Okay, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say that one of the brothers said, if you'd have let us go, we'd have been down and back twice since, they left Simeon down there in Egypt.
Yep.
So that gives you some idea, I guess,
of how much time had passed.
The distance they had to travel.
Yeah.
Simeon wasn't going through the famine. He was pretty well fed.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true.
And that was one of the other points. Even though he was unloved by everybody else, Joseph was actually taking care of him. And that the Lord takes care of the unloved. Leah was also unloved. So
it's weird that Leah says, okay.
Y'all want to study Genesis tonight?
I bore him a son, and now he'll love me.
Yeah.
And then the next one, she says almost the same thing. And the next one.
Yep.
And
nope, it's not how it works.
But it makes you wonder, why did he go into her in the first place if he didn't love her?
Well, one time it's because Rachel had those mandrakes. Okay, come on back to this account. So David's growing stronger. The family's getting bigger, for better or for worse. And by the way, he has one wife who is not mentioned because she's going to be mentioned in the coming verses. And that's Michal. And so then you throw that variable into the situation, and we'll talk about that here in a second. All right, so verse 6, now it was so while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. Let's pause with that one as well. We mentioned 2 or 3 weeks ago, Abner is obviously a much stronger personality than Ishbosheth. And I don't think Abner is trying to make a play for the throne, because he could if he wanted to, but instead, what is he going to do with the kingdom? He's going to give it to David, is what he's going to do. So I don't think he's looking for the throne, but nonetheless, he is the power behind the throne. I mean, that's how he sees himself, and he is strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. So just with that conversation about leaders, because we're dealing with some strong personalities. You got David's personality, Saul's personality, who's now dead, Joab's personality, Abner's personality. That's a lot of personality. It's a lot of ego. So one of the things I wanted us to discuss tonight was I wanted you to describe good or bad leadership qualities. Would you agree that Ishbosheth it looks like a bad leader? Most people think so. So describe good or bad leaders, and you can just give one or the other, and you just take the opposite and it'll describe the opposite. What are some qualities that you look for in a leader? Decisiveness. Okay.
If they really care about their people.
Okay. Well, so with decisiveness, obviously, what's the opposite of decisiveness? Indecisiveness. It's like you want your leader to actually make a decision. You don't want a leader to be either wishy-washy or just do nothing. And it's like, sometimes you'd almost rather someone do something. You may not agree with it, but it's like, at least they're doing something. At least they're trying. And so decisiveness, when they come to remember when the women come to Solomon and they're like, the whole baby thing and all that. If Solomon would have been like, I don't know. that ain't going to help anybody. And it's like, okay, be decisive. Indecisive, that ain't good. Brenda's one was caring for the people.
You know, he had, that's what I consider a good leader, one that really wants the well-being, welfare.
Yeah. And it's, does he have any compassion? Is he merciful? Does he love people? If he doesn't love people, in all likelihood, he's probably a dictator. And he's just looking for power. And it's like, dude, does he actually love people? Is he merciful? You know, there is a time, back to the decisiveness. There is a time, you know, is it Romans 13 that talks about the government? I think so. Romans 13, where the governing authorities do not bear the sword in vain. You know, government is meant to punish evil. That's one of their God-given roles, to punish evil. And so that decisiveness to punish evil and reward good, it's like that is a good quality. But at the same time, mercy and compassion can also be had. And are you compassionate? Go ahead, Mark.
I just heard a story about that, about George Washington and the Revolution in New York. The British had pretty much fenced them in, and things didn't look good, as so often was the case. They probably would have been trapped, but during the night, Washington ferried the men across the river with every little boat they could get, and he got everybody into the boats, the higher ups, all the officers, I think, but to the lowliest private, and he didn't go over until everybody was over. And the point was, the leader eats last. And there are many other examples,
Yeah.
like the wartime, that their men are not fodder, they're trying to spare them. And a true leader, I think that's the case. The leader eats last.
I'm making some notes. You reminded me, Mark, there's a couple of stories. Sometimes I'll read them or I'll run them in the bulletin. I can't remember if they both pertain to Washington. One account is they're crossing a river, and there's a fellow who's not on horseback, and Washington or whoever it is rides up with his entourage, and they're not decked out or anything. They really don't know who they are. And so they tell this fellow, and it's a raging river. And they tell this fellow, you can ride with one of us if you want to, but it's going to be a dangerous crossing. But you can get up here if you want to. And the guy chose Washington. He didn't realize who it was. And they make it across the river, and I'm probably hashing the story up. But when they got to the other side, the men said, do you realize who this is? And the guy said, all I know is when I looked at everyone else's face, they were scared. And he had a yes face. And he was confident. And it's like, everyone else, he's like, you look like you were full of doubts. But he looked like he was determined to make it. That was one story. The other one that I remember running is they came up, and they're always trying to cross rivers, because, of course, back then, it's like there's not roads across rivers, so you're always having to cross rivers. And there was something blocking the way, or something along those lines, and something had to be moved. And the one or two soldiers who are there, Washington's covered with dirt as he rides up. One or two soldiers who are there, if it is Washington, if I'm remembering correctly, and they're just standing there. And Washington says, what are we waiting on? Clear it. And they say, it's not our job. And he gets off his horse and he clears it. And he says, next time you need something done, call to the Capitol and ask for the president. And it's like, you're willing to get your hands dirty. And you're willing to get your hands dirty. It's like, it's another quality that, yeah. And all those things. Another good quality, where is Rehoboam going to fall flat?
He doesn't listen to the wise men.
He doesn't listen to the wise men. He listens to his friends who he's grown up with. There's plenty of proverbs that talk about counsel and the need for counsel. So just the fact that I'm glad he was willing to listen, I guess. He's listening to the wrong guys. Some people don't listen to anybody, and that's not a good leader. But you have to listen. You better have wise people in place. So Rehoboam listened to the wrong people, and that's when the kingdom divides again. Good leaders, they need to understand that they're also under authority. It's like you may be the king of Israel, but ultimately, who's the king of Israel? Like, that's the Lord. You better understand you're under authority. So all the leaders of the land need to understand that. And like I said, you just flip it around and you get a good picture of what a bad leader looks like. And I'll say this. Think about Abner and Joab. Here Abner is. And let's read on a little bit. I've been rambling too much. Verse 7, Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah. You want to talk about things about to get nasty. Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. So Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" Then Abner became very angry at the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I show loyalty to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers, and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hand of David, and you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman? May God do so to Abner and more also if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba." And he, that'd be Ishbosheth, could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. What kind of guy is Abner? I mean, how would you describe him? Do what, Rudy? Kind of a bully. Probably more than kind of. And it's like, you're not the king, dude. You're not the king. I know you're trying to strengthen your hold on the house of Saul, but you're not the king. But what do you think you can do? Oh, you think you can boss the king around. And it's like he just thinks he can do whatever he wants to do. You know, he's like, I lifted you up. I'm going to bring you down. I'm going to give the kingdom to David. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it's like, do you just think you can do anything? Now, what's Joab like? Because here Abner is, he's going to come make peace with David. Joab comes back, and it's going to be reported David's made peace with him. And what's Joab do? And it's like Joab has the same personality. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And it's it's just amazing. Bloodthirsty, and that's kind of it's a sad thing, but that's a little bit what's going on. So Ishbosheth makes this accusation. Now remember, Abner and Ishbosheth are what? They're related. What's the relation? I can't remember. They're kin, whatever the kinship is, they're related. As Mark pointed out last week, which I didn't know, maybe y'all knew, David and Joab, what are they? They're related.
Yeah, David's nephews.
And so it's like, so anyway, a lot of family stuff going on. And so Abner and Ishbosheth, who are related, Abner goes in, apparently, at least according to Ishbosheth, goes in and sleeps with his father's concubine. Lovely. Ishbosheth calls him on it. And what's Abner's reaction?
How dare you?
I'm going to do what I want to do. And you're going to charge me with fault concerning this woman. How do you think Abner felt about women?
Not so very good.
Probably not. That's the tail end of verse 8. And he is just when Ishbosheth makes the accusation, when Ishbosheth says what he says, what sort of reaction what does he think is going to come from it? I don't know, but whatever it wasn't what he got. Because all of a sudden it goes from, you slept with my father's concubine, to, I'm going to give the kingdom back to David. And it's, that seems to be a little bit of an overreaction there. It's like, if you didn't do it, say you didn't do it. He doesn't exactly say that. But he says, you might notice there in verse 9, may God do so to Abner and more also if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him. Well, if the Lord has sworn it, what should have Abner been doing the whole time? Because it's Abner, back in chapter 2, it's Abner who takes Ishbosheth and makes him king. He's fully aware that the Lord has said it's to David. He's fully aware of that the Lord had sworn that David's the next king, and yet Abner tries to, he does. He puts in Ishbosheth for a time, and now he's referring back to that. It's like, well, I'm going to transfer the kingdom just as the Lord has sworn about David. It's a sad picture. Go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, Mr. Reuben also slept with his father's
Yes.
concubine.
Yes. Which I believe that is brought up in the blessings at the end. A lot of those things that happen when they're younger get brought up at the end. What Joab's going to do is going to be brought up at the end. Yeah. And so that may all go back to Mark and Sheila's point earlier. It's like, you may not see them being punished now, but down the road, and you start seeing things happening. Anyway, Ishbosheth just can't believe what he's hearing. He could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David, saying, whose is the land? Saying also, make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you. And David said, good, I will make a covenant with you, but one thing I require of you, you shall not see my face, unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, from Paltiel, the son of Laish. Then her husband went along with her to Bahurim, weeping behind her. So Abner said to him, go, return. And he returned. Now Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, in time past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Now then do it, for the Lord has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. All right, so Abner gets word to David. David says, sounds good to me. Great. However, I want my wife. And Michal may have been his first wife. And that business, remember, that's the one where Saul is trying to entrap him, basically. Yeah, Saul's daughter, and is hoping the Philistines will kill David, and then David kills the Philistines and brings back all the 100 foreskins, the price, and says, and actually I think Saul may have said 50, and David doubles the number. And so anyway, but the last time we saw Michal, she was helping David escape. And then Saul comes up, and Saul says, why have you done that? And I believe she lies, if I remember correctly, but that's the last time we see Michal. So now David says, get her. Like, okay, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, it seemed like in the beginning with Michal, that she really loved David.
It seems like it. Seems like it.
Protected him.
Right.
They were going to take the bed away and
Right.
do away with David.
Yep.
She protected him.
Now, how's it going to end with her?
Isn't that good?
It's not. She turns around and hates him. And that's the account when he's dancing,
Yeah.
and she says, you're undignified. And David rebukes her, and she is not having children from that day forward. So the question about that is, again, who is she? She's Saul's daughter. And that makes her what to Ishbosheth? That makes her a sibling, step or blood, whatever it is. So she's at least a half sibling. Are you sure you want her back? So what do you think? Should David have asked for her?
We're not David, so.
Do what, Lois?
We're not David, so.
I don't think he could,
Yeah.
I don't think David could see down the line to what Michael's gonna do.
Probably
The
not.
way she acted, maybe he thinks
Maybe so.
she's still.
Yeah, maybe so.
Whatever.
Sure, fair enough. She is his wife. She is his wife, and it just so happens, and out of curiosity, the other translations there in verse 15 and 16, does it call that other fella her husband? Because this other fella who's following after her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is
Her
leaving
husband.
with her.
So-
Yeah.
So here, she's remarried, and Ishbosheth sins and takes her, and the husband comes after her weeping, and Abner turns around and says, "You better go home." And the fella does what? He goes home, because if he doesn't go home, what do you think Abner's going to do? So she is David's wife. It's not good. Yeah. You know, Rudy, when I was down in Louisiana, I probably told the story before, there was a predominant family in the church, about 30 or about half the congregation was family. And I called one of the fellas and I said, I need you to do a family tree. Because they all would they would call me Uncle John. I'm like, I'm not related to you. Oh, it was I wasn't getting it. Okay. So he comes and he's writing it on the back of a menu. And he says, now at this point, a grandchild was adopted in as a child. And so someone was disenfranchised and someone else was re-enfranchised. And so the family tree, all of a sudden you had this branch that moved up and over. And I said, never mind. I said, never mind. So to your point, David's family, it's a little messy. It's a little messy. Yeah. So Abner sends this message. David says, this is what I require. Then Abner starts talking with the elders of Israel, verse 17, saying, in time past, you wanted David to be king over you. Now then do it. Verse 18. And it's like, well, they probably hadn't done it before because you were probably threatening them, Abner. For the Lord has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. Then Abner also went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, and all that seemed good to Israel and the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Then Abner said to David, I will arise and go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Why is Abner doing all of this?
I get a sense he's just trying to hedge his bets. He's trying to prop up Ishbosheth as the king so he can control him.
Yeah.
He can't control David, but he knows that David could probably take him out. So he just wants to be
And remember, like Saul's house is declining. David's house is on the ascent. So it's like the writing's kind of on the wall about who's going to win this long war. So I wonder if Abner is not one, he's an opportunist. He's an opportunist. It's like, okay, I'll try to get in good with David. But the whole thing starts because his king made him mad. And he's like, he's just mad. He's like, who do you think you are to tell me what to do? And he flies into a rage, and his motives are as unpure as they can be. but nonetheless is God's hand behind it all. It's like the kingdom is coming to David. Do you think David realizes his motives probably aren't pure? Probably so. He's not dumb. But nonetheless, it's like the Lord has said what the Lord has said. And Abner keeps referring to it. And so David says, good. Israel says, right? It's starting, the wheels are starting to turn, and David sends Abner away, and he goes away in peace. And it just so happens who's not at that table? Joab's not there. Do you think David, we just talked about counsel. Should David have told Joab what was happening? Because do you think David and anybody within earshot knows how Joab feels about Abner? What did Abner do? He killed his brother. And it's like, David, you can make peace with Abner, but you better make sure that Joab doesn't hear it from anybody else. And Joab ends up hearing it from somebody else. And it's like, you might want to. But anyway, David sends Abner away in peace. And so Abner goes away in peace. And anyway, at that moment, the servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he'd gone in peace. And when Joab and all the troops that were with him had come, they told Joab, saying, Abner, the son of Ner, came to the king, and he sent him away, and he is gone in peace. And then Joab came to the king and said, what have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why is it that you send him away, and he is already gone? Surely you realize that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you are doing. All right, so Joab comes back from the raid. What does Joab think Abner's doing? Has done? He's spying you out, dude. Now, given what we know about Abner, is that a possibility? It's like, it is Abner. It's like, maybe. Not saying that's what Abner was doing, but I could easily see how Joab, it's like, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Is it the Greeks? Is that the saying, beware of Greeks bearing gifts? The whole thing pertains to what? The Trojan horse. Because they're at, where was that, Troy? They're at Troy. It's like, oh, they brought what a wonderful large statue. Until the sun goes down and they all jump out. And the city's going to end up being taken. It's like, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Here Abner is, and he comes along, and he's got a good bit of flattery with him. Right? And he said, oh, the Lord has spoken of David, all of this. Why weren't you saying that back, for example, when Saul was in the field? Who was it who was right next to him? When Saul woke up and David calls out, who's the first person to speak? Abner. Why didn't you say it back then? Why didn't you say it with Ishbosheth before all this? But now he's saying it. And so Joab, I don't agree with Joab, but I can understand where Joab's coming from. It's like but anyway. So we know what's coming. We're going to go ahead and stop there though, with Joab incredulous about what his king has done. So we'll pick up roughly at the top there of the second point, maybe about halfway down. When Joab had gone. Pick up right about there. All right. Appreciate y'all's help and attention tonight.